when the gold price starts to go bonkers, then everyone's going to want to know what the story is.
Well, it's pretty simple. We're creating too many dollars.
Why does everything cost so much? I'll tell you why things cost so much. Just like you said, they keep printing this stuff more and more, but all the time. All the time.
And the one characteristic about a country that debases its currency and goes to a paper currency, the currency always self-destructs. It always ends.
Gold and silver do an accounting periodically throughout history. It's really exciting to see this. They automatically revalue themselves when the public wakes up, and they catch up to all the currency that's been produced.
To me, I've been saying this for a number of years now, silver is the biggest opportunity I have ever seen.
In 1980, it took 1,000 ounces of silver to buy a single-family median-price home. That day will come again, but it's probably going to be less than 500 ounces. You want to buy a single-family median-price home outright, no payments, no down payment, 100% cash flow, put $8,000 aside today. You're going to be able to do it in the future.
Silver.
It's just history repeating.
In silver.
Silver, I'm sorry.
Don't hold cash.
Right.
Cash
Gold is good too, but it won't perform this way.
Is trash.
Exactly.
Repeat after me.
Cash is trash.
If you can understand that one, your whole paradigm will shift. So what's the good news?
We're in New Zealand now. This is the final stop on a Rich Dad tour. I've been on a tour with Robert Kiyosaki doing these Rich Dad events in Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, Australia, and New Zealand.
Well, what an incredible ride and what an incredible view. New Zealand is absolutely incredible. Auckland is beautiful.
This opportunity isn't going to last for long. There are these brief moments throughout history that go by, you know, as far as historic time, they go by in the blink of an eye, where the safest place to be, the place where people run to protect their financial well-being during economic crisis, gold and silver. They have been the safe haven for your finances for 5,000 years. And there's these brief moments in history where they simultaneously become the asset class that has the single greatest potential gains in absolute purchasing power, and we're in one of those right now. With every time they create new currency, and they're doing massive currency creation now, it creates a bubble somewhere. I believe the next great bubble is destined to be commodities and the precious metals. And what's amazing is I left with a bunch of these sort of ugly pieces of paper with pictures of dead guys on them that are from the US, and then you arrive in Kuala Lumpur and in Malaysia, and you trade them for some prettier pictures, pieces of paper with pictures of people on them. I don't know if they're living or dead or what, but then you leave there and go to Singapore, and you trade them for pretty pieces of paper that have now they've got like little windows you can look through in them, a little clear spot, watermarks, all this kind of stuff. And then you get to Australia and you trade them for even, they've got more vibrant colors on their currency, which I sort of like. I think the American currency is pretty drab and way outdated. We're just catching up to the rest of the world when it comes to the security that's in the notes to make them less counterfeitable. And then come to New Zealand and trade them again for different pieces of paper. And what cracks me up is governments are sitting there cranking out this stuff on a printing press, just laughing all the way to the bank, and we actually work for this stuff. I mean, we really work our asses off our whole lives for this stuff that they're just cranking out, at a tremendous rate here. And it transfers our true wealth is measured in our time, and it's our labor and the time that we have in our lives to create things, and they're able to get some of that time and labor at no expense by just cranking out this stuff. It's amazing. This will sound a little bit weird to some of the viewers, but I try to differentiate between currency and money. Currency has to be a medium of exchange. We've got to be able to buy and sell things with it. A unit of account. It's got to be portable, divisible, which means you can make change, durable, and then something called fungible. Fungible means that each unit is interchangeable. A dollar in my pocket buys the same amount as a dollar in your pocket, no difference to them. Money has to have all of those attributes, plus it has to be a store of value over long periods of time.
If this is sunk on a boat and a ship now, or it was 500 years ago, you dig it up, it has tremendous value. There will be numismatic value plus the real value of gold. This sinks, you put it to the bottom, and who cares? You know, this loses probably 5 to 10% a year in value.
It's amazing. It was a long road and series of very small transitions to get here. But basically, you know, we used to use gold and silver, and then they come out with representations for gold and silver. All the currency in the United States and in most countries was redeemable for gold or silver at one time. In the United States, our currency used to say there have been deposited with the Treasury of the United States $100 in gold coin payable to the bearer upon demand. You go into any bank, slap down your currency on the counter, and ask for your money, your gold and silver, and they would give it to you. Then, you know, we were on something called the classical gold standard that started in about 1873 in Germany, and by 1900 almost every country on the planet was on this gold standard, where you had a certain amount of gold in the treasury and you created a certain amount of notes that equaled the amount of gold in the treasury. So it was a 1-to-1 ratio. It was fully backed. Fiat means an order by an authority that has the power to enforce that order, or a decree. And so the governments can enforce the value of their currency, or make sure that their currency is the currency that's used, by making taxes only payable in that currency. So fiat currencies are given value by government decree. There's no intrinsic value to them. In fact, you know, it costs about 6 cents to create a dollar bill or a $100 bill, but basically there's maybe 3 cents worth of paper and ink, and then some labor and transport and all that stuff, except they've ruined the piece of paper. You can't write a list on it now because they printed it with ink. So basically, you know, one thing you find out is all fiat currencies eventually fall to their intrinsic value, which, because they've ruined it by putting ink on it, is the amount of energy you can extract from it, the amount of BTUs from combustion when you burn it. And you saw that during the Weimar hyperinflation. People used the currency as fuel to heat their house. Currencies have been backed by oil, by gold and silver, by land. As soon as you remove something that you can't, something that puts financial constraint on them, where you can't just print as much of it as you want, the currency is pretty much doomed.
It's beyond astonishing. And if it wasn't for the horrific effects, it would be more ludicrous. It would be actually comical that we could stand up and have some fun with it. But it is actually horrific. When you look back in history for the last 3,000 years, every episode of this kind of silly crap ended very, very badly.
You can see them repeating the same stupid mistakes today. And those mistakes, you go through history and you see something that's happened 100 times in the past, and then you see them doing the same thing to our currency supply today. The same, you know, in the US, the deficit spending is out of control. And the currency creation, if you, well, we'll put up a chart of base money in the United States. So it's a chart of the cash in circulation, currency in circulation, plus the deposits that the commercial banks have at the Federal Reserve. And it took 200 years to go from $0 in existence, paper dollars, to 825 billion paper dollars that exist. And then it took just a few months to go from that to about 1.75 trillion. And that was with the Bear Stearns, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac bailouts. And then we had, in March of 2008, I'm sorry, March of 2009, they announced another $1.2 trillion worth of, and part of that is actually purchasing bonds directly from the Treasury. Now, when they do that, that's just printing currency. That's like just running the printing press. But so the total comes to about 3 trillion paper dollars that will exist very shortly here. That's an I mean, from 825 billion to 3 trillion is an expansion of almost 4 times. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
So there will be more this printed than ever before, which means the dollar keeps coming down and other things keep going up. And that's really what's going to happen. It's predictable. And eventually this will go to its true worth, 0. So all of you savers out there and people trying to save this trash, you're going to lose big time.
They just type them into a computer, the dollars. They don't have to print them anymore. It used to be that you had to mint coinage to expand the currency supply. Then you had to print paper to expand the currency supply. But now all you do is you add zeros to it. Just and boom, you know, it's 10 times.
They don't even have to print this trash anymore.
Right.
It's electronic. That is how fast it's going to hit people.
If I can, as a member of Congress, I can find out more information about what the CIA is doing than what the FOMC is doing, the central bank, what they're doing on monetary policy. That's very, very secretive. The Federal Reserve has been given the power and the authority to create money out of thin air.
The way it works, the Federal Reserve, which is neither federal nor has reserves, it's a private corporation, and you can see this by going to their website and you go to the frequently asked questions. The first question is the Federal Reserve private? And they make their answer very obscure. If you read between the lines, it basically says, well, no, but maybe yes, but sort of no, but really yes, but definitely not. That's what it says. Then, second question, does the Federal Reserve have stockholders? Answer, yes, and by law they are paid a 6% dividend. And it couldn't be more clear. So in the answer to the second question lies the answer to the first. There is no federal agency that has stockholders. If it's got stockholders, it's private. It's that simple. But the way they create currency, the Treasury creates a pretty piece of paper with some ink on it called a bond, and that's basically an IOU. They're going to borrow something from somebody, and it says, I owe you whatever I'm borrowing plus interest over 30 years at such and such percentage. The Federal Reserve then opens up their big old checkbook that has a 0 balance in it. They're broke. There's nothing there. It's 0.00 is the balance. And they write a check for that $100, or in the case of today, trillions, you know. But they write that check and hand that to the Treasury, and when they give that to the Treasury, that currency springs into existence. The Treasury then deposits that into the various branches of the government, and the government throws a few wars, does some deficit spending, what we call pork barrel spending in the United States on things like a bridge to nowhere and stuff like that. And then it eventually ends up in government employees' hands, in the contractors' hands, and so on, and gets deposited into private banks. And then comes the miracle of fractional reserve banking. Say for every $10 that you deposit in your checking account, each country will have its own reserve ratios, but in the United States for years we had a 10% reserve ratio on checking accounts. They deposit it into a checking account. The bank is allowed to loan out. If you deposit 10, they're allowed to loan out 9. And that gets loaned usually to somebody that's buying something. They're buying a house. They're going to sign a mortgage. That's how they're borrowing the money. They're signing this mortgage. They take that $9, they buy the house, and that's going to get deposited into the checking account of the seller of the house. And then, since that's in a checking account under a 10% reserve ratio, they get to loan out 90% of that, which gets redeposited, 90% of that, which gets redeposited, and so on. And for every $10, it creates $100 of brand new currency through fractional reserve banking. And that's actually where most of the currency supply comes from.
the fractional reserve thing. If in the old days, anybody wanted to borrow any money, you had to go to the bank and borrow it from the people who were saving money.
Yeah.
Nobody does that anymore. People aren't saving much to start with, and the money you borrow from a bank does not come from the savers. It comes from the bank, as you say, creating it on the spot when you sign your name to the loan document. It's created on the spot. One of the things I've been ragging about is the reserves in the banks. Reserves in the banks have not increased a dime in 10 years. It's the same $41 billion. There's $41 billion of reserves in the banks against how many trillions?
Just 7% of our money supply has a 10% reserve. So that means 0.7% of cash in existence to cover the other, what is that, 99.3%.
It's insane.
Of the money supply.
That's right, that's right. So you talk about fractional reserve. There's no fractional reserve. What's
Right.
a fraction?
There's nothing there.
There's nothing there. 1 cent on $1 million is not much of a fractional reserve.
Right.
Golly.
So getting back to this expansion of how the money supply is created, most of the currency, about 10% or so is base money, and then, which is that hocus pocus voodoo scam where the Treasury creates an IOU and the Federal Reserve or the central bank of whichever country. So depending on the country, it'll be the Ministry of Finance and then their central bank, which may be labeled Reserve Bank or something like that. And really, when that central bank writes a check is really an IOU too, right? It's an IOU cash, and you can take it to the bank and redeem that check for cash. So they swap IOUs, and currency springs into existence. The thing is, though, after that currency springs into existence and then it gets magnified by fractional reserve banking, we work our asses off for this stuff and save up some of it so that we pay tax to the Treasury so that they can pay back the Federal Reserve or the central bank of whichever country it is the principal plus interest to a private corporation that has, it's not federal and it has no reserves.
And has stockholders.
Yeah, it has stockholders. It's like the biggest scam that has ever been perpetrated. It's amazing in the United States that we've gone along with this for close to 100 years.
The facts are there. Every fact that there is supports the argument. There is a conspiracy to steal all the money from all of us and give it to the banks.
The Federal Reserve makes credit available, but in a way it's fraudulent and it's theft because it does have value. You know, if you go to the bank and they give you $1 million, we all take it. But it becomes valuable only by diluting the value of somebody else who's holding money. If there are those who are left saving money, they're being robbed.
The majority is highly leveraged out on debt.
Are they?
If they win by us going right into a hyperinflation, the mass stupidity is winning at the expense of the banking system. I've never seen the big boys lose. In all of monetary history, it's
That's
the big
right.
boys that win. So a short-term deflation would transfer all everybody's property to the banks.
To the banks.
And then you go into a big inflation, and again, the little guys lose, and the banks win.
Well, you know, there are people who think that that is actually the conspiracy that's operating, making the whole system go, that is the point of the whole thing. And it's hard to argue against it.
We are in uncharted waters. We are in, I think, as Jim Paplava said, the perfect storm. I think, and what's interesting about it, from my perspective, is that we're just starting to see, you know, the sea starting to get rough.
The oscillations.
We're nowhere near what I believe is coming a few years out, which is like the huge tsunami that's going to really, really rock the markets.
They can't do a thing about this. It's too late. It doesn't matter. What matters is how smart you are now. If you think these guys are going to save your family, I think you're in for a sad, rude awakening.
The wealth transfer that is going on right now is enormous. This is the greatest opportunity in the history of mankind because this is going to be the greatest wealth transfer in the history of mankind. Never before have all the world's currencies been fiat currencies at the same time. This is the very first time that that has happened. and gold being a freely traded separate commodity / money. Right now, gold has begun this accounting again, although this time it's going to be worldwide, and this time there's a blizzard of paper right now. All that paper throughout history tries to come and land on this same tiny little pile of metal periodically, the pile of silver is 1/10 the size roughly that it was in 1980, the last time that silver hit $50. Today it's $15 roughly. Silver is just one of the most undervalued things that there is. There's so little of it today. The past 3-4 years or so have seen the above ground supplies of silver measured, if you're measuring it as a percentage of usage rates, how much we're using. There's a good graph that the CPM group, which is one of the 2 agencies that are used by the industry, the precious metals industry, they're hired to do worldwide audits of supply and demand and where that gold and the precious metals are being used. They have a graph where they show it as how many months of supply are above ground. In other words, if you shut off mining at any given moment, how long would the silver or gold that we have above ground last? And normally, before the 60s, we always had like 10, 20 years or more of supply. Throughout the 80s, 70s and 80s, it sort of bounced around between 2.5 and 5 years. And then in the 90s it started falling, and by 2006 we were down to 3 months. 3 months of above ground supplies compared to like 10 years normally. Silver is extremely rare. For the first time in human history, there is more gold for investors to buy than silver. That has never happened before. In fact, if you took all the gold and put it into a cube, you could fit it on a tennis court. It would be a little bit less than 20 meters on each side. But silver is far more rare. If you put it into a cube, it would measure a little bit less than 12 meters on each side. So I believe silver is the better investment of the two.
Uses around the world, people will go to the precious metals, and the precious metals will have a price that we can't imagine. You might even get to the situation where people will not want to accept dollars in exchange for their gold and silver. They're going to want, no matter how many zeros.